Hello, my name is Kirsten Campbell, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the population of disabled individuals. If you'll just hang on a second, I'm going to share my screen with you and get started. Move this down really quickly. Okay, so a disabled person is an individual who has a physical or mental condition that limits their movements, senses, or activities. Though a disabled person should not be labeled by their disability, many people of the disabled population are actually very active and can function just as a person who is not disabled can, but they still get labeled as insufficient or idiotic, and we will discuss that later. So, disabilities can be many things, as you can see in the umbrella here. It can be a visual disability, hearing, learning, autism, a physical, emotional, cognitive, or a speech or language disability. So just a little bit about each of these. A visual disability is actually a visual impairment or vision loss. So just because you have a visual disability does not mean that you cannot see at all. That just simply means you might wear glasses or contacts. The same goes for hearing. Just because you have a hearing disability does not mean you're completely deaf. You may have mild, moderate, severe, or profound hearing loss. And this can be fixed many ways. It can be fixed with a hearing aid or surgery and things like that. So next we have a learning disability. And a learning disability is just the capacity of knowledge. And that does not always mean that you are completely incapable. It just means that some of your skills are not where they need to be. So with autism, this refers to a developmental disability that is significantly affecting your verbal or nonverbal communication and your social interaction. Um, Typically, this is something that can be tested at a very young age and diagnosed. A physical disability limits a person. They not necessarily don't have to be blind or deaf again, but it can affect you. It could be as something as simple as a sleeping disorder, or it can be something as major as maybe you have an amputated arm or an amputated leg or just something like that. So moving on, a couple more disabilities. So cognitive is a developmental delay or mental retardation. And speech and language. So a speech and language disability is you may stutter, you may not be able to even speak at all, and this again can be moderate, it could be severe, it could be profound. Now, emotional disabilities actually are not always seen as a disability. Some people take these very lightly, and some people take them very heavily. So this can be the inability that you cannot explain how you feel, or it could be your intellectual ability, sensory ability, health factors. You may not be able to build any relationships with your peers, with teachers, with your family even. It could be very severe. Um, these things can be caused by past experiences, and then you may have inappropriate types of behavior under certain circumstances, or you may just, a person may just have emotional disabilities all the time. A person with emotional disabilities can also just, they can be happy one day, depressed the next day, and they have a tendency to develop physical symptoms of this. And this is typically when a school or person in your job or something like that would get involved and possibly call and contact a social worker or a counselor to evaluate your just the way you interact and your actions towards others and towards yourself. So a little bit about the history of people with disabilities. So disabilities have been around since the beginning of time, and as you can see here, I'm just going to point this out right here. So this dates back to as far as the beginning of time, but we'll start with the medieval period. And it all started in the medieval period. People with disabilities were viewed as they were people who had sinned and been punished for those sins. So even if a person was born with mental retardation or a disability or blind or deaf or whatever the disability, they were viewed as born under hostile influence, or they had already sinned, and that is why they were disabled. So moving on here, so from 1485 to 1660, the views were still pretty much the same. A disabled person was an idiot. They were a lunatic. They were blind. They were lame. They had these labels that went with them. And caring for them was not a civic duty, or it was a civic duty. It was not a religious matter. And people just, they really didn't care about the disabled individuals, and they were really looked down upon. So then we move to right here to 1660 to 1832, and during this period, pretty similar to the medieval period, they just believed that God or astrology caused the disability, and it wasn't necessarily seen as a possession. It was just something that they thought couldn't be restored, and there was a reason that they were punished for that. And during these times, as you can see right here, a disabled person in these times, they were treated very harshly and very brutally. So during this time, this would be a good situation now where a social worker would step in and see what the situation was and try to help someone who was mentally disabled or physically disabled. So during the early 19th century, as you can see here, about 100,000 people were living in asylums. This number was due to just the higher authorities did not want laziness to occur, and they believed that by helping the disabled live at home, it was not something that they should not promote that, as that may cause laziness, and they didn't want that to go on for generations after generations. So then we go down here to the early 20th century. So during this time, in the early 20th century, a man named Julian Huxley influenced the views, and basically he told everyone that the disabled were people who were useless. They were not sufficient. They were just extra bodies, and they needed to be fed, and they needed to be clothed, and they couldn't give anything in return. And his views were, why should we help them if they can't help us? So at that time, they were believed to be a threat to the nation, and sadly, many of them were segregated from everyone, put in separate homes, not taken care of, as they had been for a long time. It's just that these views got worse and worse. So then we move on to 1945 to current. So since then, since the early 20th century, our world has actually passed some laws, and job security has been put in place, and it is encouraged that people with disabilities of any type have fitness access, have a way to be mobile, have daily skills and morals that someone with no disability should have. And actually, in today's society, there is still some discrimination, but this has drastically decreased since the medieval times, which is wonderful, because we as a population should treat them as equals because they're just another human being. So in 1990, as you can see here, 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, and this prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. Under this act, discrimination against a disabled person is illegal in employment, transportation, public accommodations, communications, and government activities. The law prohibits private employers, state and local governments, employment agencies, and labor unions from discriminating against the disabled. Employers are required to make a reasonable accommodation in order for the disabled person to perform their job function. And as you can see here, this is just kind of a, right here, kind of a picture showing, handicap, mentally. This could also mean emotionally, deaf, blind. Any of those are to not be discriminated against. So now I just want to give you a quick statistic. So a very popular bias of disabled individuals is that you're disabled, you can't work. This is not true. It is actually said that workers with a disability are more likely to be employed than those with no disability. This is mainly part-time, and this is actually from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they did a survey on this in 2015, and so it is actually more likely for a disabled person to be part-time employed than it is for someone with no disability. So let's watch this video.
Thanks, Vanessa. I have to admit, if the decision was ours, we'd say, you've got the job. Start tomorrow. Isn't that right, Dan?
No question, absolutely.
But we do still need to clear it with Lloyd. Lloyd, general manager. Normally it would be a formality, but he is very demanding.
We have to make sure Lloyd doesn't have any issues with hiring someone like yourself.
You can imagine, if there were any problems down the line, well, he'd possibly need to be reassured there won't be.
It's not us, you understand, it's him. It's just that in your case, he might need some, as Faith said, some reassurance.
So, Lloyd, this is the applicant I was telling you about.
Right, Sarah, you're the young lady behind this CV.
Yes.
Very impressive. And Lisa have been telling me good things too, but you will need to reassure me about one thing. You're not really into all that awful house music, are you? Welcome aboard, young lady.
Thank you. See the person, not the disability. Find out more. Visit the website.
Okay, so as you can see in this video, just the two individuals who were interviewing her were pretty discriminatory if you really look at it, saying, someone with your condition, and we'll have to get this approved, and just things like that. And then the boss comes in, and you think he might be a little bit biased, but then he's actually just, he tries to make a joke, and then he hires her on. So this would be a good example of discriminating against someone who has a mental disability. Next, we're going to look at micro, meso, and macro levels of intervention. So first of all, when you're looking at micro, typically you're dealing with a small, either the individual or their immediate family. So first, we may, as a social worker, you may ask, can the family help with this client's needs? And then from there, you need to decide what you're going to do to help this individual. A treatment plan, an action plan, what is going to take place to help this client? Does it need to be on a larger level, or does it need to stay on a small level with just the client with some, they're a minor, they may need tutoring, any age may need medical care, maybe need counseling. There's so many things in the micro level, even though it is a small group, that you need to, as a social worker, focus on first before you move to the meso level. So meso is more with groups, with the community, with neighborhoods, just things like that. So you may decide your client needs more group counseling. Maybe they need some activities or hobbies. So at this point, if your client is athletic, you may want to look for some community basketball teams or baseball teams, or if for adults, or if they're still in school, you may see if they can get on some sort of sports team they're interested in. If they're interested in music, you may try to find a group that likes music, or you may try to get them in band at school. If the client is still a minor, you would want to look at appropriate school systems. Typically, schools will work with you as long as you are in their district. But you would want to make sure that that school is going to work with you and be appropriate for your client. And this could go back to the micro level. At this point, just getting some tutoring or counseling from the school on a regular basis, depending on the school system and their situation. Okay, sorry about that. My auto got, okay, sorry about that. My got disconnected. Okay, so you may want to look for accommodating housing or a neighborhood that would, so sorry, that would take your client on. There may be housing that's excellent housing but can't fit a wheelchair, or maybe, they only have stairs and your client can't make it up more than a couple of stairs, or there's just so many things that can go with housing in the neighborhood you live in. You want to make sure it's a safe environment. So on a macro level, typically this may not be something necessarily that social workers always deal with. Psychiatric help can fall under this category. It can also fall under the micro and meso categories, but on an extreme level, it would fall under macro. Also, just if you're wanting to start some kind of prevention club or organization of discrimination, this would be more of a macro level, or changing policies against or for your clients. That would also fall under the macro level. So, like I mentioned in the previous slide, hobbies are very important. Are very important for your clients. These are good ways to be involved and be active, to express yourself, and to feel accepted. Some good examples, as you can see, are art, music, and sports. And we are going to talk a little bit more about that on this slide. So, do these names sound familiar? And For some reason, that did not stay on there. But Stephen Hawking. He is a very popular physicist. He is pictured here. Let me get my pointer again. This is Stephen Hawking. He is disabled to a wheelchair and can only speak through this computer screen. Right here, he can speak. He is very well known and was diagnosed with ALS when he was only 21 years of age. So, like I said, he speaks with the assistance of a computer, and he's a full-time power chair user and has been since the 1980s. But he never gave up, and he had best-selling work, and he was on the Sunday Times bestseller list for 237 weeks. So someone else that would sound familiar, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd U.S. president, pictured here. And here's one of his speeches. Let me, oh no. Okay, so Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we're going to listen to part of one of his speeches. If I can get it to play.
1941, a date which will live in infamy. United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
So, FDR was the 32nd president during World War II. And here we are, still here today, alive and well, and he was actually also a wheelchair user. He was paralyzed from the waist down. Next, we have Ralph Braun, pictured here in the wheelchair. He actually was a man with muscular dystrophy. He was born with it, and he actually created the first wheelchair-accessible van in 1991 and owned Braun Ability, which was the company that created the first minivan. So next here we have Stevie Wonder. He was a musician, singer, and songwriter. He was born blind, and he was still an amazing, amazing singer and songwriter. We're going to listen to a little bit of one of his songs.
For once in my life, I have someone who needs me, someone I needed so long. For once unafraid, I can go where life leads me. Somehow I know I'll be strong.
So Stevie Wonder was considered a child prodigy and signed his first record label at the age of 11 years old. Next we have Helen Keller. Helen Keller was a political activist and lecturer. She was deaf and blind, and she was the first deaf and blind person to earn a college degree. She wrote 12 books, including a spiritual autobiography, and was also a member of the Socialist Party in America and campaigned for women's and labor rights, which is amazing. So next we have Cher. Cher actually was diagnosed with dyslexia, and she's a famous singer. So here's one of her songs. And last, pictured here, we have Albert Einstein, a mathematician and physicist. Einstein was actually diagnosed with a learning disability and could not speak until he was the age of 3 years old. So that's pretty amazing, as he is such just a model for many people today, and he is pictured still today in so many things dealing with math and science and physics. So this is the end of our PowerPoint, and I hope that I covered enough about those with disabilities to be able just take some things into consideration. Next time you see someone who's disabled, help them out. And sometimes just remember, just because you can't see a disability doesn't mean it's not there. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And these people really struggle with their disabilities, and this can be a big deal to those who are disabled, and they aren't necessarily, it's not always there to see for other people. Like I said, it can be emotional, it can be behavioral, it can be cognitive, it can be learning. So just take that into consideration next time. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.